Welcome to the Screen the Screener College Basketball Podcast with your hosts, Mike Randall and Gus Kearns.
Welcome in, listeners, to the Screen Screener College Basketball Podcast. We're always talking everything college hoops. It could have been anywhere else on the dial, but you chose to be here with us, Mike and Gus, and we appreciate that. Let's start with some thank yous. Thank you. Thank you, Spreaker, for getting the podcast out. Thank you, Belljar, for the intro and outro music, as always. And thank you to all the healthcare workers who are helping save lives every day. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, listeners, for tuning in. Hopefully, we're helping fill that sports void that exists with no Masters, no tournament, no NBA, very little NFL draft news and the like. The way that we're trying to fill that void is with our season recap series. And luckily, we're going to talk one of those teams that could have won the whole darn thing this year. So we brought in Jim Meehan from the Spokesman-Review. Jim's been covering the team for over 13 seasons. Please give him a follow over at SRJIMM, capital S, capital R, capital J. We talked about the dual lead guard situation that's been existing for what seems like ever. We talked about the new lead guard that hopefully, fingers crossed, will be joining the roster, Jalen Suggs. And then we also talked Aaron Cook. News on the transfer portal. Going to get the senior guard, help fill some of the Woolridge and Gilder minutes. Also just talked, what were the chances getting to a Final Four again and maybe playing a team like Kansas or Dayton in the finals for the whole thing. If you like what you're listening to, please go over to Twitter, give the podcast a follow. the S Podcast, efficiency of keystrokes, of course. Don't forget to give Mike a follow over at Randall Rant. Say nice things about the production quality that he's been putting out for all of these cool season recap series podcasts. Don't be afraid. Go over to your podcast consumption vehicle of choice. Leave a kind review. Say nice things about our guests that tell unbelievable stories, just like Jim Meehan. Again, please don't forget to give Jim a follow on Twitter at SRJIMM, capital S, capital R, capital J. Catch up with you before you know. Welcome back in, listeners, to the Screen Screener College Basketball Podcast. We're always talking everything college hoops, even though there's no hoop games to discuss. So what we're trying to do is bring back and recapture some of the glory from this past season. One of the greatest teams, top ranked all season, were your Gonzaga Bulldogs. And we brought in Jim Meehan from the Spokesman-Review to talk a little Zags. Jim, thanks for jumping on the podcast. How are things out west?
Hey, kind of interesting times right now. All kind of huddled in our houses and just trying to get through this thing. But sun's shining today. It's beautiful out there. Try to get out and take a walk and pass some time.
I'm enjoying your optimistic outlook of the day. I hope listeners, you do the same and copy what Jim suggested there. So
it's all we can do at this point.
It sounds about right. Let's get into your team. One of the surprises on the national scene, but maybe not to you, was Filip Petrusev. He just grew into the role that was left from, Rui and Brandon Clark and JW3. He starred in this role. What made Petrusev so efficient and, an All-America guy and possibly a player of the year type guy for next season? What made him so efficient this particular season for the Zags?
Well, I think you saw some of it during his freshman year. If you remember the Duke game in Maui, Filip came off the bench and scored 10 or 11 points against a great front line that Duke had that year. He played very well as a freshman when he got the chance. The problem was Killian Tilly got healthy, came back, and kind of gobbled up all those minutes that had been going to Filip. So he had to wait his turn. And then this season, Killian started out the season injured. So again, he had kind of free reign to be the guy inside. And one of the kind of underrated aspects of Gonzaga these last 7-8 years has been that true post presence. Shemek Karnowski, Jonathan Williams, Domantas Sabonis, Kelly Olynyk had kind of an inside-outside game. And Filip was kind of the latest to take that over. And he was just a force down low. He's got the NBA-type body. He's about 6'11", good wide frame, strong kid, and very skilled. So the way Gonzaga runs the offense, it goes inside first almost every time down. And they work from there. If it's a kick out for a three, so be it. Or then they'll get into their ball screen package or whatever. But kind of that first option is Filip Petrusev, and he never really gave them reason to go away from that. He produced double figures every night out except for two games, I want to say. And one of those is when he left with a sprained ankle against BYU. A lot of 15 to 20-point games, just a steady force in there. And one of the biggest things he did was put almost every other opposing front court into foul trouble. I believe he drew the fourth most fouls nationally, the fourth most free throws nationally. That's one thing when you're playing a top 15 team. They've probably got pretty good reserves behind their big men, but even teams like that, when you get to the second or third big, that's a world of difference. And that's really one of the reasons Gonzaga was able to dominate inside a lot of teams and get to their their backups inside, made the job a lot easier.
The efficiency that he played with definitely speaks to getting to the free throw line and shooting twos, which is a little bit of an underrated part of offenses during this particular time frame in basketball, with all the threes getting jacked up. And Coach Few loves that, getting that ball inside. But part of the way that ball gets inside is with your two lead guard situation. He kind of fell into it this year with transfer Ryan Woolridge and, Saf Joliaye. He developed into a second offensive initiator. Dayton tried to copy this two lead guard. Kentucky tried to copy it. Creighton copied it to a certain extent. Ohio State did it with Walker and Carton. Why is this model so successful year after year for the Zags with this dual lead guard? And just how fast is Woolridge with the ball, and how diverse is Ayaye?
Well, Woolridge is one of the fastest kids I've seen. He gets inline to inline like a sprinter, and makes pretty good decisions while he's doing it. So he was a perfect addition for him. They needed a ball handler. They needed a guy who could kind of create his own shot a little bit. He did that some. And they needed a guy to run that break because they've got bigs that can get out and go. Killian Tilly, Anton Watson. Philip Petrushieff runs the floor very well. We talked about them throwing it inside in their half-court offense. One of their best plays is that early post-up in transition. They just kill people with that a lot of times because their bigs are mobile enough to get down there. So Ryan, and then defensively, Ryan Woolridge, what he did all season going against the best point guards in the country, Peyton Pritchard, Cassius Winston going back to the scrimmage against Michigan State, Xavier Simpson from Michigan,
Jordan Ford, right?
Jordan Ford, Nico Mannion. I mean, these are all names you're going to hear on draft day, a lot of them. So he was a big difference maker. Admon Gilder, just a steady force, good shooter, good all-around player, good defensive guy. Could guard multiple positions because he's about 200 pounds and strong as an ox. So he really helped him as well. And you're right, Joel Ayayi really just had a breakout season. I think there was potential there, but people forget he signed at Gonzaga. He was a 17-year-old kid. He probably weighed about 160 pounds maybe. Big, tall, thin. He's 6'5", so that's pretty slender. He put in kind of the redshirt year that a lot of these Zags go through, really developed, continued to play for France overseas on those national teams in the youth competition and had great summers. And he stepped into one of the star roles this year. He was a 10-point-a-game guy, knack for hitting clutch shots. He did that against the Huskies, Washington Huskies. He had a 3-ball near the end that kind of sealed that up. He carried them against St. Mary's at the end of the game here. MVP of the WCC tournament. So he really just grew into his role. A very versatile kid. He's second rebounding, 6.5 rebounds or so a game, was second on the team. Facilitate the offense when necessary. Most of the time that was left up to Woolridge, but he was a very good option there. I mean, he improved so much that he's on draft boards, at least a few of them that I've seen, going into the off season. So, yeah, that two-guard situation for Gonzaga goes back forever. The first team that made the run to start all this in 1999, Matt Santangelo, Quentin Hall. Both of them kind of played together, played off each other. Right. We had Dick Allen Stepp worked off each other. Ravio and Pargo. Bolden and Pargo, I think, shared it. Stephen Gray was in the mix there at times. the national championship runner-up team, the team that got to the title game in 2017. And everybody kind of considered Nigel the point guard, and he was.
Right.
Josh Perkins brought the ball down almost as much, set up the offense. A lot of stuff ran through Nigel, but, Josh Perkins did a lot of that work as well. So it's just something they've always done. I think they like they love skilled guards. They love lead guards.
Right.
They've had a string of point guards forever that have got the job done. And, I wouldn't say Joel is necessarily, 1A, 1B type of point guard situation, but he can handle it and he can set up the offense. What they love is just that ability to break a press, that ability to have two guys work off a ball screen up at the top and create. And just, your point guard is usually a heady, smart guy that knows everybody's positions and knows where people should be and knows how to get the offense going and running. So, and I think it helps in the open court, their transition game. Joel Ayayi can get down the floor. So they've done it forever. It's not easy to do. You got to have two guys who had the skill set to pull it off, and they've had a string of those guys come through, and they don't mind sharing that limelight.
No, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't, include Pangos and Bell in that equation as well. They were just absolutely fantastic working together. And I guess we should take a moment right now, Jim, and talk about the next lead guard in line for Gonzaga is Jalen Suggs. He's large. He can shoot it. He's a top 20-ish recruit nationally. Now with, the Zags player development, should we be talking about him, leading this team and being one of those lead guards and maybe working with Ayayi if he returns? And that's a really big and talented backcourt.
Well, Jalen Suggs, for all the great players Gonzaga signed, Jalen Suggs is at a different level. He's a top 10 guy. I think I've seen him as high as 6 or so. He's on the National Player of the Year for high school, Players of the Year, 2 or 3 lists. He didn't win it, but he was in the mix. And so that just shows you what they're dealing with. He is a big-time athlete. I've seen enough games of his and highlight tapes. 6'4", strong body, already as a high school senior. Quarterback in football that can really play. He is a very good football player. Safety, led him to state titles, I think, in both sides, basketball and football. And just, I think it goes beyond just all that. He just seems to have that it factor everybody talks about. He's very well liked in the school. His coaches, I talked to his coach a couple of times. I think he coached him since 7th grade. And he just says the kid's a winner in every sense of the word. So I think they're getting an all-around that he might be their next one and done if things unfold the way they could here. He should have probably the lead track for that point guard spot. Again, another kid who can play combo guard too. He can play off the ball just like this other kid they're bringing in, Dominic Harris, 6'4", nice athlete from Temecula, California. He can handle it. He can play off ball. Same type of deal. But Suggs is the highest ranked recruit they've ever had. Now that's a little skewed only in that a lot of their foreign kids weren't on some of those recruiting lists.
Right.
If you go back to Elias Harris and Roni Turioff and, even Kelly Olynyk and those kind of guys. Now Kelly probably wouldn't have been there originally anyway, but it's only been the last 4 or 5, maybe 6 years that some of those guys like DeMontis started getting on lists, Shemet Karnowski. So, but yeah, he's a big time talent. The only worry there is that when he committed, he did it in a national television on ESPN when they were playing in a tournament. He talked about that there's a chance he could go pro and go to, I believe, Australia or New Zealand, like a couple of the guys have, in the past couple of years. Last I saw, one of those crystal ball projections that 24/7 Sports does, it's 86% to Gonzaga and 14% to turn pro. Just fine from Gonzaga's end. They'd love to have this kid because he is a star in the making. You can just see it.
Well, he totally fits your profile. You mentioned the ability to play combo guard, and you also mentioned the athletic IQ that he owns with the diversity in his sports background. And then also just the winning profile. Like if you're going to recruit players that winning is a habit, that makes sense and totally fits into what you're normal student athlete profile is over there at Gonzaga. And later on today, you're going to talk to another member of this backcourt. You're going to talk to Aaron Cook, who's kind of an do-everything guard from SIU. He's entered the transfer portal and is the latest student athlete to go out west. So maybe talk about, for the listeners, what kind of guard are they getting Aaron Cook? It seems like he might be kind of Gino Crandall-ish, where he's going to come off the bench, be able to run the offense, but then do a bunch of other things, especially on the defensive end.
Yeah, this is a very talented kid. His last year at SIU was cut short. He broke his hand. And then I think it was a little bit slow to heal. So it got to mid-January, and I think he probably thought, how effective can I be, coming back and not being full strength. So he went ahead and decided not return for the rest of the year and keep that option open of getting a redshirt year and being a grad transfer to move on. I think he might have a bigger role than people on the outside might think, just because he's a starter at Southern Illinois for 3 years basically, if he'd have stayed healthy his last season. 6'2", 185. I've seen some tape and highlights of him. He can go. He's a pretty good athlete. He can really guard. Always is near the top in the Missouri Valley Conference in steals. He led the team in steals. And a guy who can run your offense and shoots it well enough. He had 1 year he shot at 38% from three, and another at like 35 or something. So he's a capable shooter, and I could see him either starting right out of the gate. If Joel returns, he could have those three in the starting lineup. If Kispert returns, he could go smaller. But there's no question he's going to play a lot of minutes. They just don't have a lot of bodies in the backcourt. They lose Gilder and Woolridge. They were thin to begin with there last year. So I think Aaron Cook's going to step into a very prominent role. Heck, who knows? I mean, if he's got 4 years under his belt, he's a veteran of probably 100 college games. He might start at point, and Jalen could be the two guard, or they could just play together. So I think at this point they'll have to see what they get. But from what I've seen stat-wise, video-wise, this is very much in the mold of the Woolridge, Crandall guys that they've had come in as grad transfers and make a huge impact on the program.
Well, it sounds like a nice problem to have for the coaching staff, that's for sure. If you have to figure out minutes between the players you just mentioned, whether it be Kispert, Ayayi, or talented freshmen. I mean, that sounds a problem they wouldn't mind solving. Jim, can you talk a little bit about somebody we didn't get to see a ton of this season who could actually play a big role for you guys next season, and that's Anton Watson. He's going to influence success next season, no doubt. He was just kind of finding himself prior to getting hurt. He's a really interesting player. Can you allow the listeners just how he might explode next year and what his skill set involves and why he's being looked at as a potential positive contributor to next year's success?
Like we mentioned there with Philip Petrushiev, Anton started the first handful of games because Killian Tilly was coming off the injury. And you saw it right out of the gate. I mean, he's a true freshman starting in some big-time environments, with the early season schedule Gonzaga plays. And he's just composed, calm, both ends of the court, defensively, offensively, outstanding. Just kind of high IQ guy, but he has athleticism. I mean, he's 6'8". He can shoot it a little bit. He didn't shoot it very good for Gonzaga last year, but I think in the long run he'll prove to be a capable shooter. But he does it all. He can pass. He can switch on to other, defensively. He can guard point guards all the way up to a 4 or 5. He put up some nice numbers early on, and I think you could see the same thing that you saw from Philip Petrushiev, freshman year to sophomore year. When those minutes and that playing time go up, I think his numbers are going to just climb and climb. And he is a very talented kid. Makes me feel old about myself. I covered his dad, Deion Watson, at the University of Idaho, and Deion's 6'9", forward, and one of the best rebounders I've ever covered. He is just a tough guy on the glass. So I've stayed in touch with Deion for years, and he's been in the area here. And so when his sons came along, one of them was a very good football player at the University of Idaho, Anton. I remember meeting Anton somewhere, AAU tournament or something like that, and he was wearing his dad's number, if I remember right. And I told him, hey, if you're going to wear that number, you better be a pretty good rebounder. And I think Deion pounded that into Anton's head. So, but Anton just has this great versatility to his game. He can handle the ball, and at his size and with his athleticism, he can really create problems for teams at both ends. And that spot's kind of opening up for him next year at the 4. Depending on who's back. Timmy with Petrushieff, with Anton, 3 high-level front court guys, and just kind of like Gonzaga's had for this last decade, just a tough, versatile front court. Makes them hard to deal with.
Sure does. And you mentioned the early post-up offense, and it sounds like the genes are with Watson as well. It sounds like there's nothing to be mistaken there. Like, that's not going to be a misnomer at all. He's going to put up big numbers and perform in a big way. And the fact that you mentioned his sports IQ, again, falls right into the profile that you're trying to build out there. One of those guys that fits into that profile, and just had an amazing season. And, he's one of the players who we're going to wait a decision on, and that's Corey Kispert. The vet did everything for your squad this year. I guess the initial question is, what's the feel? Is he going to return for his senior season? And then I guess the second part of the question is, just how valuable was he to Gonzaga's roster after the turnover that you guys experienced last season?
He was kind of that stabilizing force. There was a lot of questions about Gonzaga after the off season when they lost 2 first-round draft picks, 3 or 4 other guys that went pro. I mean, they lost a ton from their rotation. Corey Kispert just kind of took over that leadership role in the off season, carried it through the regular season this year. But beyond that, he stepped into a much larger role on the team. He has always been a secondary scorer, 4th, 5th option type his first couple of years. This year, that wasn't the case. He became one of the primary guys. He changed his game a little bit to where he could score off the bounce a little more, added some versatility that way. He had an outstanding season. He had some of the biggest baskets they had all season at the Bahamas. He was big on the road in a tight game against San Francisco. He was big, couple of buckets at the end of that game. But I think beyond that, he's just as steady, solid. He was the leader of that team along with Killian Tilly, and he produced. He produced night in, night out. He was a 44% 3-ball shooter at 6'7" on the wing. That's tough to deal with. So I think I'm not sure how much more they could have asked from him last year, but be very similar this time around. They lose 3 seniors, Woolridge, Gilder, and Tilly, and if Corey comes back, he's going to be even more of the solo type leader of that team, kind of the emotional barometer of that team. And they'll rely on him even more. His numbers might climb too. They could go down given what's around him, but he could be just as effective. Now, will he turn pro? Will Joel or Phillip, same right. Kind of situations with all 3 of them? None of them, really project as first round guys. There was a time when Ayayi was kind of in that area earlier in the year. Phillip was in that late first area. Most of the mock drafts either don't list them or put them in that mid to low second round range. Gets back to kind of the kid's preference. Does he want to take that chance, try to beat the odds and make an NBA roster that way? Or does he want to come back, improve his game and skills? In Phillip's case, that's showing some perimeter ability and the ability to guard on ball screen smaller players in space. That hasn't been his strength. Joel probably needs to, be more consistent shooter, better on the defensive end. But do they take the chance of, entering the draft, maybe going in the second round or going as a free agent into summer league, that type of scenario? Maybe you end up in the G League. Or do you come back, improve what NBA scouts want from you, and maybe become a first-round guy where you have that 2-year guaranteed money? That's huge.
It's a big difference.
Yeah, and it sets you up kind of for a lot easier path, I guess is the way to put it, to make it in the NBA and stay there. So they've got decisions to make with this current coronavirus, disrupting almost every event on the sporting calendar. True. Who knows what that pre-draft process is going to look like? I mean, I don't know if they're going to be able to work out in front of teams. Their game tape is probably going to be the biggest scouting tool that the executives are going to look at. So if I had to guess, I would think, 1 or more will probably at least test the waters. But I would guess they'd at least two of them are back. Probably Joel and Kispert would return. Phillip, I'm not as sure about because he kind of literally dipped his toe in the water last year. He did declare. I don't think he worked out a ton for teams. I think it was more just to get familiar with the process. So I'd almost be surprised if he did go through the process. But whether he stays in or not, like I say, when you're in that second round to free agent scenario, not too bad a deal to come back and try to win a national championship and maybe boost your draft stock.
Well, if you have an opportunity, like you mentioned, the opportunity that Kispert had to step into that lead offensive role, and like Petrusev did with the lead big role, like why not take advantage of those opportunities? And then you throw in the caveat of playing for a national championship kind of every year out there, which has become tradition. You guys are always in the conversation. And this year you were in the very limited conversation along with Kansas. And, maybe we throw Dayton in there for winning the whole darn thing. Let's get you out of here on this, Jim. Allow fans to dream a tiny bit here. Do you think this particular edition Zags had enough to win the whole thing if the tournament took place this past season?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. Las Vegas considered them one of the favorites. Kansas was probably first, but I think Gonzaga was usually second on those odds lists. I think with what they did during the season, they win at Arizona, they win at Washington. North Carolina wasn't, what we expected North Carolina to be, but they hammered North Carolina here at the McCarthy Athletics Center. And then probably their best win was against Oregon. Neutral floor in the Bahamas. They win that game in overtime. Really didn't play great. Neither team played great. Second game in 2 nights. I think both teams were not at the top of their game. But as you saw, Oregon turned out to be a very good team. And so they beat BYU. They swept St. Mary's, who I think this could have been a remarkable year for the WCC. I think Gonzaga had a chance to get to the Final Four. I think St. Mary's and BYU, in a tournament setting especially, are going to be tough outs. I could see them both getting to the second weekend. They might have had 3 teams playing in that second weekend and one playing in the Final Four in Atlanta. So it wasn't the year of dominating teams in college basketball. Now, by the end of the year, Kansas, Gonzaga, I would say Dayton, Baylor, maybe San Diego State. I think those teams did have some separation from folks. I think they were clearly the top 5 or 6 teams. Not to say that they're going to march through the NCAA. Nobody marches through that tournament without a couple of close calls. Gonzaga had as good a chance as anybody, even Kansas. I think that would have been just a great matchup to see those teams go at it, or any of those 5 or 6 teams we mentioned. It's one of those tough deals to swallow, that bitter pill, because you only get so many chances to win it. Even the blue bloods, like Kansas or Kentucky, Duke, they're not winning it every year. I mean, it's so hard to get there. It's so hard to get through that tournament that you'd have just loved to see them have the chance. All those teams, even the 16 seeds and the teams that nobody's ever heard of until they pull an upset in that first weekend. That's one of the best weekends on the sports calendar. And it's just a shame we didn't get a chance to see it unfold.
Yeah, we echo those sentiments completely, Jim. And I think all the listeners feel pretty similar to how you just explained it and rolled it out. We're totally on board with you here at the podcast. We thought that select list of teams that could win it all include Gonzaga. So thank you for recapping the season with us and giving us a little time. Jim, please stay safe out there, stay healthy, and thank you so much for catching us up with Zags basketball and recapping a great season out there.
Hey, thanks for having me, and likewise to you. Stay safe out there, and hopefully in a few months we'll be getting close to normal again.
That sounds just about right. Cheers, cilantro, Gonzalazzi out there.